Wolf Messing, perhaps you were still quite unfamiliar with this name before making today's video. I myself know almost nothing about him. He is not a famous politician, not a prominent general, and not even a businessman with huge assets. So who are you? People who know him often call him the most miraculous man in the world. Indeed, without exaggeration or overstatement, the exact word miraculous describes him in the truest way throughout his life. Messing repeatedly demonstrated special abilities that surprised the whole world. He conquered even the most prominent scientists like Einstein or Freud, making them believe that science is not the most omnipotent thing in the universe. Through countless trials in the presence of great figures, he completely changed people's belief in miracles. Messing even caused Hitler to put a reward of 200,000 German marks on his head. The miraculous man we are talking about is always asking himself the questions, who am I? Am I a false prophet without a homeland or a true savior? Superpowers. Where does my power come from the Almighty Supreme Being or from evil entities? Years after his death, his manuscripts and private diaries were sealed by the Soviet State Security Committee due to his travel to Israel via Germany and Poland. Finally, they were found in the Russian Federation. On the title page of the declassified personal diary, 21-year-old Ming was even able to write down the date of his death. The more we learn, the more we see that Messing's story is truly mysterious, and today we hope to be able to answer some of those extraordinary mysteries with you in the video Wolf Messing, the Life Controller. 2. History's Greatest Prophet. It's time for me to answer you, who is Wolf Messing? Ming was born in a small village near Warsaw, Poland, on September 10, 1899. His parents were both devout Jews, and even in difficult circumstances, they remained always strictly adhere to religious laws. The religious atmosphere in the family made young Ming also become especially confident in the traditional faith. When he was 6 years old, Ming attended a Jewish elementary school. He had an extremely good memory and was very good at reciting long scriptures. This unique talent attracted the attention of a clergyman. The rabbi suggested sending him to a Jewish theological academy for training. For his parents, who were devoutly religious, it was a rare good thing. However, Ming was not at all excited about becoming a missionary in the future. Therefore, after graduating from the theological school, he refused to study at the Theological Institute. Because of this issue, Ming and his family had a heated debate. However, it was during that favorable period that something strange happened to Ming. One day, his father asked him to go to the grocery store to buy cigarettes. At that time, it was relatively late, everything was pitch black. Ming walked out into the dark hallway, and a giant in a white robe appeared on the stairs. Ming described that moment in detail in his memoirs as follows: I saw his bushy mulberry hair, his face with wide cheekbones, a pair of eyes shining brightly in the night. The messenger was standing in front of me. My child, God sent me to find you, to foretell your future, and you must fulfill your duty to God. The sound echoed like thunder, radiating mysterious energy, causing me to fall down and faint. When Ming woke up, he saw his parents reciting prayers with a 9-year-old boy. These things are indeed very difficult to understand. After experiencing such a strange thing, he no longer resisted the theological academy but followed his parents' arrangements. Ming went to another city and became a student at a Jewish theological academy. However, the future is unpredictable. 2 years later, just when everyone thought that Ming would become a missionary due to his life's noble teachings, he turned in a different direction. One time, Ming was in the prayer room and met a homeless man. This person was very similar to the messenger he had seen before. Ming was once again panicked, But this time he did not faint, but deep doubt arose in his mind about his parents and his religion. He thought that he was here because he was deceived by a homeless person, and that the last messenger was hired by his parents to impersonate him to change his mind. This thought was like a black whirlwind that stirred his mind, and in his teenage years, the rebellion had to take place. Ming wanted to run away and leave the theological academy, seeking freedom. To fund his escape, he stole money donated by Jewish believers. After that, he sat alone in the prayer room, not to pray or repent, of course, but to count money. Obviously he got a little bit, but it was still too little. Ming carried the anxiety of a person on the run, boarded the train to Berlin and hid under the benches to avoid being checked by the conductor. Tired and sleepy, he quickly fell asleep as the ship rocked and rolled. However, his biggest fear still came true, despite the dim lights in the train car. The ticket collector discovered him and asked where his ticket was. Ming quickly grabbed a small scrap of newspaper from the ground and gave it to the ticket collector, praying in his heart for blessings so that the conductor would treat that scrap of paper as a ticket. As a result, the ticket checker looked closely at the scrap paper, then seriously punched a hole in it, indicating that the ticket check was completed, and returned the scrap paper to Ming. The ticket collector looked at the skinny boy in surprise and wondered why he had to hide under the bench if he had a ticket. That's right, somehow miraculously, the surface of that scrap of paper just passed the ticket checker's eyes. Perhaps you thought that the lighting was not enough so the ticket checker looked wrong, but the truth is that it was Ming who manipulated that employee's thinking. This is the first time Ming's supernatural powers have broken out. That ability to hypnotize others broke out unconsciously without warning, and everything was a success. Ming continues his journey on the train to Berlin, ending his childhood. Before the war, Berlin was a giant city, full of pressure, love and hustle and bustle. To solve the problem of food, clothing, and money, Ming worked as a messenger, carried groceries, washed dishes, and shined shoes. This was indeed an extremely difficult time for him. 1 month after arriving in Berlin, Ming gut collapsed on the street. Ming was hungry, people couldn't feel his pulse, couldn't hear his heartbeat, his body was cold. Almost all signs of life had disappeared. Everyone thought that Ming was dead, so they decided to send him to the morgue. 3 days after Ming died, Professor A.B., an eminent psychologist and neuroscientist, came to the morgue to search for research data for his topic. Here, he discovered that Ming's pulse was still beating weakly and immediately tried to save the young man, who was standing on the brink of life and death. Years later, Ming recalled the incident and gratefully shared, "I think I not only owe him my life, but he also discovered my talent and guided me to practice it." For the first time, Ming heard the concept of psychics from Professor A. Professor A taught Ming to believe in himself, believe in his strength, and encouraged him to do whatever he wanted to do. A trained Ming and also conducted many experiments to test his abilities. Gradually, Ming learned how to accurately analyze sounds, that is, choose a sound that he needed to hear from the many thoughts that arose in everyone's brain. And if you haven't imagined it yet, it's the ability to read other people's minds. Professor A introduced Ming to a manager named L, and from then on, he started making money by performing. Ming's performance mission is very simple: lie down and pretend to be dead in a cold coffin. He was able to put himself into a very deep, and completely motionless sleep for 3 days. It feels like Ming is arbitrarily controlling life and death. With this tedious job, Ming could receive 5 marks per day. But in the situation of a teenager who was used to starving to death, this was a remarkable improvement. Ming's ability to control life and death can, in fact, be understood as a form of controlling the body's functions, including the heartbeat and internal organs. This is quite common if you learn about Indian yoga masters, and it has been proven through experiment, not simply an idle statement. In 1935, French cardiologist Thales Bousse used a handheld electrocardiogram to conduct experiments with a yoga meditation master. After the yoga master entered meditation, experts began to observe and measure. They were amazed when the device showed that the Zen master's heart had stopped beating, but he was still alive. In 1961, 3 yoga masters claimed to be able to control cardiac arrest on their own. Doctors in New Delhi also performed experiments, and the results showed that the monks' blood pressure and heart sounds had stopped, and only the electrocardiogram showed normal results. Ming also mentioned in his autobiography about his trip to India to observe yoga masters, as follows: "Of course, in India, I could not miss the opportunity to witness the art of yoga with my own eyes, not controlling one's own body, mastering it through continuous training. This 5-fam skill really surprises people. What I am especially interested in is observing the deep tranquility, a state with my own eyes meditating for weeks. I have never been in this state for so long." From Ming's description, we can see that in the 1920s and 1930s, cases of controlling the body's functions were not isolated cases. As long as you persevere and practice properly, most people can do it. However, since the age of 15, Ming has relied on pretending to die to make a living, so that ability is difficult to explain with this yoga technique. Ming's various special abilities have gradually attracted the attention of many scholars and research experts. The scientific community has conducted a series of experiments, the most famous of which is the 195th century experiment in 1915, when Ming's manager took a 16-year-old boy to Vietnam on a trip. This trip happened to become the most precious memory of Ming's life. His experiments on his special abilities caused a local stir, attracting the most famous scientists of the time, including Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud. They went to see Ming's performance and were interested in it, and invited Ming to do some experiments. Einstein and Freud can be said to be the pinnacle of science, and of course Ming is the opposite. He knows nothing about science. But the confusing connection between electromagnetism, quantum, relativity, time and space was completely empty in his mind. One is a science star, the other is a science-blind man. 2 people who are completely mismatched in terms of education come together to create the experiment of the century. When Ming entered Einstein's residence, he was overwhelmed with books piled everywhere, almost always within reach. Einstein was friendly and dressed simply, while Freud was dressed in black, with a stern, determined expression. Nevertheless, Freud was always friendly with the teenager Ming. During the meeting, the experiment began. Freud and Einstein wanted to test Ming's ability to read other people's minds. Freud began to convey a first command in his thoughts: go to the closet, get a pair of tweezers, go to Einstein and pull out 3 strands of his hair. Ming, 16 years old, did it immediately, without a word. Ming received instructions from Freud's thoughts, then picked up the tweezers and walked to Einstein, directly stating his thoughts. Einstein heard it and smiled, rubbed his head, and nodded in agreement. Ming was surprised, but still not convinced. He gave a second command: give Einstein a violin and let him play. Ming followed instructions, took the violin and gave it to Einstein, and continued to make requests using Freudian thinking like last time. Einstein laughed again, picked up the guitar and began to play. Both of them were completely convinced. There was no longer any doubt. They discussed a lot about Ming's magical powers over the young man. It was a relaxing and happy evening. Before Ming left, he told Einstein, "You will receive a very important prize in 1921. At that moment, Einstein heard it. He stuck out his tongue humorously and didn't pay attention. But later, reality confirmed Ming's prediction to be incredibly accurate. In 1921, Einstein won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect and his achievements in theoretical physics. He is recognized worldwide as a leading star in science. The deeper he went into research, the more he discovered mysteries of the universe and supernatural things that science has yet to discover. Maybe, in the near future, Ming's supernatural phenomena for humanity will no longer be an unbelievable and difficult-to-solve problem. After proving his abilities to two great scientists, Ming continued to participate in other experiments, including one conducted by the Psychological Association in Berlin, Germany. This psychological society gathered famous psychologists at that time, similar to Einstein and Freud. They wanted to see Ming's magical powers with their own eyes. This time, Ming gives scientists a superpower that he has never performed on stage, the ability to move objects. Professor Ander, a materialist, absent-mindedly watched the experiment, staring intently as Ming mentally moved his cigarette from its original position. During this process, the monitoring device detected a strengthening of the electric field around Ming's arm. Any student volunteer exposed to this electric field was left with red marks that looked like burns. At the same time, the electrical conductivity in the air also increases significantly. The professors asked excitedly, "How did you do?" But Ming admitted that even he himself did not know. This trip happened to become the most precious memory of my life. Messing, his special ability experiments caused a local stir, attracting the most famous scientists of the time. Albert Einstein and Sigmund Freud were no exceptions. They went to see Messing's performance and were interested in it, and invited him to perform some experiments. Einstein and the 1950s can be said to be the pinnacle of science. And of course, Messing was the opposite. He knew nothing about science, but the confusing connection between electromagnetism, quantum, relativity, time and space was completely empty in his mind. One is a science star, the other is a science-blind man. Two people who are completely mismatched in terms of education come together to create the experiment of the century. When Messing entered Einstein's residence, he was overwhelmed with books piled everywhere, almost always within reach. Einstein was friendly and dressed simply, while Freud was dressed in black, with a stern, determined expression. Nevertheless, Freud was always friendly with the teenage Messing. During the meeting, the experiment began. Freud and Einstein wanted to test Messing's ability to read minds. Freud began to convey a first command in his mind: go to the closet, get a pair of tweezers, go to Einstein and pull out 3 strands of his hair. Messing was 16 years old, executed immediately, without a word. Messing received instructions from Freud's thoughts, then picked up the tweezers and walked to Einstein, directly speaking the thoughts in Einstein's mind. Einstein heard and smiled, rubbed his head and nodded in agreement. Messing was surprised but still not convinced. He gave a second command: give Einstein a violin and let him play. Messing followed instructions, took the violin and gave it to Einstein, and continued to make requests using Freud's thinking like before. Einstein smiled again, picked up the guitar and started playing. Both of them were completely convinced. There was no longer any doubt. They discussed a lot about Messing's magical powers over the young man. It was a relaxing and happy evening. Before Messing left, he told Einstein that he would receive a very important prize in 1921. At that time, Einstein heard it. He stuck out his tongue humorously and did not pay attention, but later reality confirmed Messing's prediction to be incredibly accurate. In 1921, Einstein won the Nobel Prize for the photoelectric effect and his achievements in theoretical physics. He is recognized worldwide as the North Star of science. The deeper he went into research, the more he discovered mysteries of the universe and supernatural things that science has yet to discover. Maybe in the near future, Messing's supernatural phenomena for humanity will no longer be an unbelievable and difficult-to-solve problem. After proving his abilities to two great scientists, Messing went on to participate in other experiments, including one conducted by the Psychological Association in Berlin, Germany. This psychological association gathered famous psychologists at that time, similar to Einstein and Freud. They wanted to see this magical ability with their own eyes. Messing gives scientists a superpower that he has never performed on stage, which is the ability to move objects. Professor Ander, a materialist, watched the experiment in dismay. Looking intently, Messing was using his thoughts to move his cigarette from its original position. During this process, the observation device detected a strengthening of the electric field around Messing's arm. Any student volunteer exposed to this electric field was left with red marks that looked like burns. At the same time, the electrical conductivity in the air also increases significantly. The professors asked excitedly, "How did you do?" But Messing admitted that he himself did not know. Among the abilities Messing later demonstrated, people are still most surprised by the ability to read minds and predict the future. Many famous figures of great stature such as leaders and heads of state all take seriously what Messing said. This can be demonstrated through the story of Józef Pilsudski, Marshal of the Polish Army. When he joined the Polish Army, Messing took on a role as a military medic. One day, a lieutenant and 3 soldiers came to the medical department where Messing was working, asking him to pack his things and leave immediately. Soldiers escort Messing. It turned out that Marshal Pilsudski wanted to meet this miraculous man. The Polish people at that time often gave the Marshal the most sincere compliments, saying that he was great, strong, quiet, decisive and full of strategy. Such a great figure, because to meet Messing, many people had to come to his residence. Messing came before Marshal Pilsudski, asking how he could read other people's thoughts. Messing honestly replied, "I don't know anymore. Try to imagine that, in a country of blind people, there appears a normal person with eyesight." A blind man asked him, "How do you can see everything?" The other person replied, "I can just naturally see them." The meaning here is that although he has extraordinary ability, he does not know how this ability is produced and its specific principles. What is that? After the end of World War I, in order to expand territory, a war broke out between 2 newly established empires, Soviet Russia and Poland. Poland moved from attack to retreat quickly. Marshal Pilsudski wondered how this war with Soviet Russia would end. Messing discreetly replied that the Polish army would soon be victorious, but before that the Poles would have to retreat to Warsaw. So what is the truth? In April 1920, Tukhachevsky, Marshal of the Soviet Russian Army, began a counteroffensive. The initial counteroffensive was relatively successful, with Soviet troops even reaching the vicinity of Warsaw, the capital of Poland. But in August, the situation changed again with the decisive victory of the Polish army at the Battle of Vistula. The Polish army marched eastward and Lino proposed the peace treaty. Later, Marshal Pilsudski once asked Messing about the future of the country. Messing only said that the Marshal would live another 15 years. After the conversation, the Marshal arranged for Messing to be ascribed to headquarters and gave him a gold watch as a parting gift. The first time Messing came to headquarters, he was not familiar with life there. However, he used his magical ability to read the thoughts of the officers, so he knew clearly the views of the officers from all over the world. That person knows how to behave properly to have a smooth life. However, the wheel of times is always in motion. World War II is about to break out. Can Messing survive the danger safely? After the birth of Germany in 1934, Marshal Pilsudski knew that his fate was short. Before he died, he was always worried about the future of Poland. At that time, Messing knew that German tanks would cross the Polish border, Junkers fighter planes would bomb Warsaw, and the prospect was extremely dark. The old Marshal had served his country all his life. If Messing told him the truth, the future of the war would be too cruel for him. People did not accept him, some acting suspicious that he was a dangerous character, while others suspected him of being a spy. Therefore, the Soviet government decided to examine him, and an academic committee of 12 professors was established to examine him closely. For example, they blindfolded him and put him in a completely dark room, asking him to distinguish 24 colors from a pile of colored paper, pencils and paints. Besides confusing black with brown, blue with dark green, he can see all colors. The professors continued to blindfold him and let him read newspaper editorials. He read it without missing a word. The next day, he was scheduled for a thorough examination by a team of doctors. What are the results? The academic committee eventually drafted an official document proving that he had a unique and extraordinary ability. On a snowy night, he finished his performance and returned to the hotel after a stressful day. While he was resting, someone suddenly knocked on the door. As soon as the door opened, 2 officers were waiting outside. They were ordered to take him to Moscow and had to leave immediately. He had to put his clothes back on and follow them until they entered Stalin's palace. The first time he met Stalin, he did not trust him very much and showed a clear attitude, telling him directly, "You are just a scammer." Stalin did not believe the report and he wanted to check it himself. The first mission given by Stalin was as follows: "Tomorrow, you should visit my house in the countryside." Simple, right? With your talent, I think you won't need any kind of travel document. With his talent, he easily bypassed all layers of protection through hypnosis, making the bodyguards believe that in front of them was the leader of Soviet national security. The second test is more difficult and requires more skill. Stalin ordered him to go to the state bank and withdraw 10,000 rubles without taking any documents with him. The next morning, he confidently went to the bank with only a blank piece of paper in hand. He was able to control the teller and withdraw the money easily and then leisurely go back out. Stalin finally made an extremely difficult request. He wanted him to predict important events in the near future. He replied that at the end of the year there will be a coup in Bucharest, the capital of Romania. There will be riots and massacres. The failed coup would begin on January 21st and end on January 23rd. Stalin thought for a moment and said that if his prediction about Romania comes true, we will continue to meet. Afterwards, Stalin seemed a bit disappointed that he could not demonstrate his own abilities in practice. He went on to tell Stalin that a German attack was imminent, that the Germans would occupy Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and would shoot and kill tens of thousands of people in a place called Babi Yar. They would build concentration camps and hold hundreds of thousands of Soviet prisoners of war, who would die in agony. He knew that these things would happen, but he couldn't say it. He cannot use human lives and tragic truths just to prove the accuracy of his predictions. On January 21, 1941, while he was in Kharkiv, Ukraine, he heard news from Romania on the radio that a riot had broken out in Bucharest. 2 weeks later, an official of the Ministry of Internal Affairs secretly took him to the Kremlin. Stalin was smoking a cigarette, pensive, and said that his prediction had come true. Stalin asked him to talk about the future of his 3 children. Stalin asked about the future of his second son, Vasily, and he suddenly had a feeling of fear in his mind. He saw Stalin's future, saw that after Stalin died, Vasily would be arrested and subjected to interrogation, torture and torture. All power and glory will disappear from Vasily, and his fate will be tragic. Surely that was not what Stalin wanted to hear. He only said one sentence: the future Vasily will become a general. The simple answer is probably because of Stalin's authority at that time, allowing his son to become a general, even a national leader. As for Stalin's daughter, Valana, he also cautiously said that she would live a healthy, long and happy life. A few months after the second meeting, Germany began attacking Moscow in November 1941. he was again invited to the Kremlin. At this time, Stalin looked extremely tired and he really wanted to know when the war would end. He saw that in 1943, the tragic and fierce patriotic war would take place in the southern city of Stalingrad. At the beginning of May 1945, the Soviet army won the battle in Berlin. On May 8, Nazi Germany surrendered and the war ended. But even he was horrified when he saw the number of May 8, 1945, which meant that the war would continue for several years and also meant that countless soldiers and civilians would die. In the war, Stalin sighed helplessly because in his plan, the war was expected to end the following year, 1942. He lit a cigar and sat there without saying a word. In 1942, the war entered its climax. Both sides were deadlocked. On January 10, 1942, in the Kremlin, Stalin once again met with him and fully recognized his abilities. During this meeting, Stalin asked about Nazi leader Hitler, President Morel, and British Prime Minister Churchill. He asked whether Hitler would remain in power until the war ended. He answered each question clearly. As for Morel, he said he died before the war ended, and Churchill would call on Western societies to form a coalition to oppose Soviet communism after the war. After that, the world will have two major factions that will confront each other for more than 4 years. He said this long period of confrontation would be called the Cold War. He predicted the Cold War in 1942, a term that was not yet in use at the time. 5 years later, on March 2, 1947, U.S. President Harry Truman delivered the State of the Union address to Congress, proposing to restrain communism, marking the beginning of the Cold War. Many years after his death, people's love for him has not diminished. Based on historical events, the Russian Film and Television Production Center has made 3 films and 1 television series with him as the subject. The TV series about him released in 2010 has skyrocketed since its broadcast. Even though it is re-aired every year, the ratings are still very high. In fact, in the Soviet Union, people enjoyed watching his performances, and the stage was always overcrowded. During his performances, people's respect for him was not only because of his superpowers, but because his existence brought hope for miracles in the world. Therefore, to this day, many people are still very grateful for everything he has done.